Welcome back to Wibble Farm, and I've got my copy of Way of Kings here, and I've got my cup of tea, and here I've got a lovely apple and cinnamon cake that I got at a farm up the road. There's a farm here, there's a farm up the road, it's farms all over the place in Somerset. And what better place to be to read a big fantasy book than out here in nature? When you go on gammon trips, you're stuck right out in nature. Now we're on chapter 8, and it's a big long chapter, but it's not going to be a big long video unless I spend too much of it eating this cake. It's nice. Sod off, says Jasna Colin, and never come back. And so Shallan goes and has a little cry in the corner, and pain spren crawl out of the walls around her, showing that pain spren do in fact respond to psychological pain as well as physical. But immediately Jasna summons her again, presumably to give her even more of a dressing down, and she has to go and find out what sort of a dressing down it's going to be because, well, Jasna's so very important. Turns out she's not going to tell her off at all. It's purely because Shallan left all those spheres still in the bowl. You know, do you remember she put them in the little bowl in the alcove to light it up earlier on? Jasna didn't even notice that Shallan had left a letter there, so Shallan prompts her now. Go on, have a read of that letter. Jasna reads it and goes, do you know what? I like this, okay. Incidentally, the continuation of the story with Brother Cabsel is so very slight in this chapter. He wished me to pass on his desire to speak with you, says Shallan. Not surprising, Jasna says. That's it. So Jasna goes, right, tell you what, that letter has impressed me, but the fact of the matter is, you're still not educated enough in history or philosophy. If you can change that, and then come to me again, then I'll consider you. In fact, then I'll probably make you my ward if you've sufficiently learned enough about those two things about which you currently know nothing. Now, she's never granted this opportunity to anyone else ever, so Shallan is like way ahead of the curve here. Problem is, it's no good. She's already wasted 6 months, I think, and they haven't got another 6 months, and it would take years to get to the level that Jasna wants. It would take absolutely ages. She's out of time. Shallan is out of time. She's out of options. Because the fact of the matter is, in a couple of months, people are going to start calling those debts in, or at least they're going to start realising there's no excuse for them having not been yet paid, and they're going to start to realise that all is not well in the Davar or Davar household, and they're going to realise that their dad is actually dead and not just a recluse as they've been. I really want to eat this cake. Speaking of Shallan's family, there's a couple of details here that are worth taking into consideration. Angry people, and in this particular case, this is her being upset about the fact that Jasna has been angry at her. Angry people unsettled her. She couldn't help but think of her father in one of his tirades. Couldn't help but hear screams, bellows and whimpers. So this guy, obviously a piece of work. We've already heard that he scared away any tutors that might have educated her. So like, honestly, if he hadn't have been like that, I mean, alright, maybe he might not be dead because we don't know quite what happened there, but if not, and he hadn't been like this, she might have all of the credentials that Jasna needs. And then a couple of pages later, on 150 and 151 specifically, we get a couple more details. There was that matter of the strange collection of maps they'd found in his study. What did they mean? And here's a point that stands out. Helleran, her eldest brother, had known more, but he had vanished over a year ago, and her father had proclaimed him dead. Vanished? From a family with an explosively angry father at the head of it, and who have enemies all over the world, as is detailed like 2 paragraphs before. So that seems sort of suspicious to me, as if something may have happened to that brother that's not entirely as described by the dad. And then we get this. She raised her free hand to her head, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of House Davar's situation, her part in it, and the secret she now carried, hidden 10 heartbeats away. So, in that memory, when she was holding a shard blade, she's still got that shard blade. Here we have another character that's got a shard blade, like, hidden in... I keep doing this because I sort of imagine it being hidden in your arm in some way, because it kind of, you know, fadoof, and it lands in your hand, but of course it's more like it's hidden in your soul. It's bonded to you, you know, and you just summon it and then wait 10 heartbeats and badoof. So we've seen that, like, kings have these, assassins have these, Shallan's got one of these. What is going on? What is the story of her past that's led to all this? I really want to find out. So Shallan leaves and she's walking along outside dejectedly. And she meets Yalb. Remember Yalb? The bloke from the boat who showed her through the town? Well, now he's back and he's happy to show her back to the ship again because he assumes she wants to leave. He says, did you do it? Did you get in? She goes, no, I tried twice, but I didn't. He goes, well, I find third time's usually the charm. And we've just been shown that this guy is a gambler, and a gambling cheat at that. So he convinces her to have a third try. But she doesn't just want to go back again and pester Jasna even more. She wants a different angle, and she's got one. She asked him to find a bookshop for her. Sure enough he does, and she goes in, and she asks for as many books as they've got on history and philosophy. And at first they're a bit condescending to her, but then when she makes it clear that she's serious and she's in it for the real stuff, they bring out these books and they charge her the earth for it. And at this point, Yalb comes in with a bit of a hustle. Won't spoil it for you if you haven't read the chapter, but there's a fun little bit where he comes up with this way to convince the shopkeeper guy to lower the price, and she walks away with all those books. Great! And now we find out what Shallan's great plan for her third attempt at pestering Jasna is, and it's just do what she said, just really cram, read books about the subject, and then just be clever at them, and then, you know, get her before she leaves and go, look, I'm clever now, I've read these books, which is perhaps a little bit naive, but you know what? It actually works, because Jasna comes in at that point. Shallan's squirreled away in another balcony thing, another alcove up in the Vale. Jasna finds out about this, pops in and goes, oh, look, all right, you've convinced me. Even though it's silly to try and read these books in the time allotted, Jasna is impressed with the fact that somebody would try. In other words, she finally says, you got moxie, kid! It's what we've been waiting for her to do since 2 chapters ago. She finally does it now, and you know what? That's a more reasonable sort of pacing, isn't it? Brandon could have got away with doing it in the first chapter, and maybe you could make the argument that there's been a bit of padding since. But the thing is, during that padding, we've learned stuff. Characters have been introduced, themes have been introduced, we've found out stuff about Shallan's past, which might have been clumsy to drop in somewhere else, whereas here he was able to sort of weave them into what was actually happening. And we've spent more time with Shallan and got used to her as a character. We've shared in some of her subterfuge and some of her internal thoughts, and we're just sort of, you know, a bit closer to her now. Otherwise it might have been a bit rushed, and we might have been less sympathetic towards her if we found out what her interesting plot was, and then she immediately just sort of tricked Jasna into making her ward. This way, we found that she actually is, like, really prepared to work really hard to get what she needs. But we also know that despite that, and despite the fact that she's prepared to put a load of work in, essentially what she's doing here is a swindle. So it's an interesting sort of a seesaw. On the one hand, she's trying to do something dishonest, but on the other hand, she's prepared to work honestly to get there. It's interesting, isn't it? It's an interesting little duality there, which, by the way, is going to come up later. So, the first hurdle is hopped over, is leapt, is jumped. Shallan is going to become Jasna's ward. That much is clear. Jasna's still sort of holding her at arm's length and going, well, you know, you can petition to be my ward later, but in the meantime I'll give you lodgings and I'll teach you things and you can help me with my studies and so on. So she basically is her ward now, like from now on, that's done. But of course, that's not all of Shallan's goal. That's not the entire plan, is it? No. Not is it? No. My response to this chapter. Is this the first time in this book when a single scene has carried over from one chapter to the next without cutting to a different character in between? I think it might be. I'm glad he did that, because all this hopping back and forth was starting to be... It never annoyed me, but it was starting to be a formula that I had recognised, so it's good to shake it up here. Also, this is a scene... Now, you know, this scene needed getting over with. This is essentially like step one. This is a single point in Shallan's story. She wants to be Jasna's ward. Now she's Jasna's ward. Her story starts here. That's not like a big midpoint victory. Like, that's step one. And Brandon only dragged it out as long as he did because he needed to establish some things and, you know, tell us some stuff about the world and, you know, just make it feel like we weren't just suddenly dropped into something. But that needed to be done and over with. Otherwise we would start going, come on, Brandon. So he put those 2 chapters together and it's done now and we can move on. Great. The other reason I was glad that he did that was that I needed a rest from that punishing Kaladin chapter. I mean, that really was, oof, dear. Oh dear. So now I've relaxed in a city of tinkly bells and marbles with jewels in and magic and glowing lights. There was a lovely bit about people walking around with lanterns filled with spheres, so like, you know, coloured stormlight coming out, you know, casting rainbow light everywhere. She compared the people to Spren because they were all different colours and they were walking around. Isn't that a lovely image? And it was at about this point in the book, when I read it the first time, that I started playing Freedom Planet, which is a game that's very much a tribute to the Mega Drive Sonic games. It's a very good game. You can get it now on something you own for fairly cheap, and I recommend it if that sounds good to you. But in it, you are collecting things that are really rather a lot like the currency in this book. They do appear to be marbles with magic glowing jewels in them. Different kinds of jewels appear to do different things, although I haven't really studied it to figure out what. And yeah, that's not relevant really. It's just I just liked it, so I thought I'd pass it on to you. Let's see what I've got in my notes about things that we learn and details that are hidden in this chapter. I've already said some of them. We've learned that Shallan's father was basically abusive, and she gets flashbacks to her time with him. Jasnah's Soulcaster's smoke stone is dark and cracked from popping that big boulder earlier. That's going to make Shallan's real mission rather harder. There's the collection of maps that Shallan and her brothers found. None of them knew what they were, except for their eldest brother Helleran, who's now disappeared, and thinking about him always makes Shallan feel ill. There are 4 foreign kingdoms: Jarkeved, Alethkar, Kharbranth, and Natanatan. Or at least those are the 4 that Shallan knew about, but in one of the books there is reference to the 5 kingdoms. The bookseller's name is Artmyrn, Artmyrn, and the only reason I bring it up is that she recognises that immediately as a Thaylen name, so it's obviously the sort of name they have, Artmyrn. In fact, when those people with the difficult to pronounce names earlier, I think they were Thaylens, weren't they? The people with the eyebrows. We have a bit of currency information. Bromes. An emerald brome is the highest denomination there is. It's worth 1,000 diamond chips. We learn of chulls that their shells really are enormously tall, but are very light, and you can do stuff to them and it doesn't hurt the chull. For example, you can sand them down to sit on top. You can drill hooks into them to attach them to carts, etc. Well, I don't know if it doesn't hurt the chulls at all, but it's certainly nobody minds whether it does or not. I think I got the sense that it didn't. Chulls are steered in the coastal area around Kharbranth anyway by tapping their antennae with a long pole. Bip! Woo! On Shallan's father's estate, they use complex leather bridles instead. Let's try not to forget Helleran Davar, or Halaran Davar. Halaran Davar. Shallan's eldest brother, missing, presumed killed by father for knowing too much. And that is presumed by this reader rather than any character in the book. It doesn't seem as if Shallan has had any such suspicion. There's a game, which I think is a card game, called Cabers, and that's the game that Yalb is playing with some lawmen when Shallan comes out and he suggests the little swindle. The middle moon is called Nomon. N-O-M-O-N, or Nomon, and I think it said it cast a blue light on things. Let's check. Yes, a pale blue light, and it rises sufficiently late into the night that staying up this late had been a rare privilege for her in her father's house, but these city people around them barely seemed to notice the late hour. What a strange place this city was. So she's very sheltered, and we get another cue in this chapter that she has, you know, the habits and the airs of a rich person, basically. When she meets the woman at the bookshop, it says, at least they weren't completely pagan, they respected eye colour, and the woman wore a glove on her safe hand. So she does have these, you know, she thinks that those things are proper, and she would be sort of alarmed if they weren't being observed. Nearer the Flame. The chapter is called Nearer the Flame, and we find out that that is the name of a book, a novel, written from the viewpoint of a man who slowly descended into madness after watching his children starve. Now I wonder whether, because the chapter is called that, you know, I wonder what sort of bearing that has on the contents of the chapter. We find out about Shallan's father in this one, so perhaps, you know, he went mad after watching his children starve. Don't know if that correlates, because they might be about to starve, but they don't seem to be doing so yet. It's worth noting, in case it comes up as important later, that she takes a shot here of Yalb as he looks at his the previous drawing she did of him from the previous memory of him that she took. So if you're keeping track, she currently has a picture of Yalb in her memory, and I don't know what other ones she has in there. The Passions. She refers to the Passions, which could just refer to emotions or something, but the way it's said makes it seem like a codified superstitious thing. The passion being referred to here is you win when you need it most. Finally, there's a note about the Shin. Shallan believes that the people of Shin live in mud and worship rocks. Which sounds a bit racist, doesn't it? And we already know that she carries various prejudices inside her. At any rate, she knows that the assassin who killed the king and kicked off the war against the Parshendi was Shin, and I think we know that as well. I don't know if we've been officially told it, but I think we have, and if not, it's been repeatedly established, because in this chapter we hear about that Shin philosopher that was mentioned a couple of chapters ago when we first met Jasnah. Her name is brought up again, the name with daughter in the middle of it, and of course the assassin had the name son in his name. In fact, he had son's son in his name, and so anyway, enough connection has been drawn there that we know that it's all the same people. And there we go then, that is another chapter cover of my increasingly battered copy of The Way of Kings. It's getting lovely and battered. Look at this. You see those big creases there in the middle? And look at the spine and the state of that now. Oh, yeah, lovely. Lovely. I like myself a nice pristine, I love a pristine paperback book. The day you get it and you can, and that bit there is really, really sharp. Love it, love it, love it. But I don't know, there's something about a big fantasy book. It wants to feel used. It wants to feel, I want this on my shelf, you know? I want future generations of my family to find this thing and go, look, here's a well-loved book. Here's a well-worn book. Yeah. So now we're this far into the book, and that's a fair way into a book. For most books. In this book, there's quite a way left to go, but it's all fun, it's all good, we're going to have a good time, I promise you. Oh, there are some pictures of chulls now. There's one, look, there's somebody riding on a chull. And these pages are supposed to look like they're from Shallan's notebook, you see. Okay, so now, next time, I shall be talking about Chapter 9, Damnation! That's right. It's a Kaladin chapter. So if you're reading along with me, then go and read Chapter 9, Damnation, and we shall reconvene and we shall have a little chat about that, shan't we? I don't know why I went a little bit like this just then, but I did, didn't I? Chulls are steered. Shush.